Tired of asking why? Welcome to the Unresolved Life Podcast, where we are answering life's most difficult questions. Now, here's your host, Teresa Blaze.
Welcome to the Unresolved Life Podcast. I'm Teresa Blaze, and today I got a really cool guest with us. Her name is Sophie Goss, and I met her through the Daily Audio Bible Facebook group, among things, and, we kind of got to talking, got to know each other, and when I learned of her story and how she came to know Christ and her heart for different things, I just thought it would be a really good story to share, to encourage, and so on. So, Sophie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, we are glad to have you. So, let's step back. Before the Daily Audio Bible, before everything, what was your religious upbringing?
I was actually raised in a Christian home by my grandparents. Both my teen mother and unknown father handed me over at a young age. So I was raised by my grandparents. They were Christian. And so I actually did spend most of my young life going to church. In fact, in the house I grew up in, it was a requirement. As long as I lived under my grandparents' roof, I was told I needed to attend church with them. So I attended one church or another with them until I was about 18.
Okay, so you had the typical Christian upbringing. Hey, you had a drug problem, you were drugged to church, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So what happened at 18?
As soon as I moved out, I wanted to go my own way. What happened at 18 really was something that began much, much earlier in my life. But at 18, I got to express my abandonment or rebellion, I guess. I think like a lot of other people who have early experiences in the church, I saw people do disappointing things that didn't seem very Christ-like. And I'm a very sensitive person. I don't know, I have a delicate disposition, I suppose, and I take things seriously, and I've always held people to high standards, and myself especially. And when I saw people not walking their talk, I became very saddened and ultimately very jaded by all of it. I think it's also important to say that I never felt that I had a relationship with Jesus. I went to church. I had a relationship with church, I guess, but we didn't read the Bible at home. We didn't pray except over meals. So there wasn't really a spiritual life outside of church. And so that part of me never formed.
Well, it would be safe to say that you saw the religiosity and the religious trappings, but you never really saw a genuine relationship with Christ, either within yourself or within your parents or grandparents.
My grandparents, yes, I think that would be fair to say.
At this point in time, what happened when you were 18?
So when I was 18 and was able to get enough hours at work that I could move away, I did, and just began living a life that didn't involve church. And I'm from a part of the world that's not very churched. I'm from one of the least churched states in the nation. The town that I was living in and had grown up in was largely an anything goes kind of a place. And there were a lot of different belief systems in a lot of the people I knew. So I just started experimenting, I guess. I mean, I do think that I always wanted to believe in something. I have a strong seeker quality to me, I think. And right. I really was seeking truth, but I sought it in some very different places. I mean, when I left the church, I walked far away from the church.
Okay, so if you were not interested in church, what did you come to in order to replace it?
I was seeking to understand myself better, and I was seeking to elevate myself, I believe. now. I don't think I had a clear understanding or purpose of really what I was doing. I don't think I had an understanding of my own motivations at that young age. But
right.
I saw a lot of people doing various New Age practices. I was surrounded by a lot of people who were doing divination. So that was probably my first foray into New Age stuff. I had friends who had tarot card decks and things like that. And so I started with that. I didn't ever really take to it. I actually really wanted to, but it didn't really feel like it was necessarily for me. I had those things. I kept them with me, and I had books about how to do it, but I didn't really do it. At that point, I wasn't all that serious about, I don't know, my spiritual growth, I guess. I was curious, but not really serious.
Did you ever get like super serious?
I did.
Okay. And so what happened?
Well, that's much, much later. I just want to be clear that this day that you're speaking to me, I'm 46 years old, and we're talking about when I was 18. So that was
I understand.
A long time ago.
Right. No, I understand. A lot of things happen
yes.
in between, and we everybody has their journey.
For sure. Yeah, so I think I would characterize my 20s and part of my 30s as kind of dipping in and out of various New Age practices, but not with very much sincerity or seriousness. It was kind of going along with the people around me. And then, around the time that I married my husband, I was kind of just not believing in much of anything and was not really practicing anything. I was still carrying all of those things around with me. We would move and I would pack boxes and I would see my sort of pagan books and things, but I wasn't really using any of those things. Wasn't tending to any kind of spiritual garden at all. Okay. And was really focused on, I guess, the life of the mind. I had gone to graduate school and was trying really hard to establish a career and, was married, and just, I wasn't really thinking about spiritual matters at all for quite a long time. But I would say, in 2010, I initiated a really big transition in my husband's and my life. We had moved to the Midwest a couple of years before that, so that he could accept a job. And when I knew I wasn't happy there, and I kind of got fed up with where we were, I initiated us to return to Oregon, where we live. And that was a really hard return. There wasn't really a safety net or anything to catch us. It was a very stressful time. We ended up living with someone, initially kind of couch surfing almost, for a while. During that time, that person we were staying with, he could see I was struggling, and that things weren't going very well for us. And he, kept inviting me to this Unitarian church that he was going to. And then he started introducing me to people. I would just characterize this person as being very spiritually open. And so he just kept encouraging me to do a lot of New Agey activities, like playing with stones and getting a pendulum for divination, and going and doing yoga and with this group of Unitarians, and just a lot of things. He introduced me to people. He introduced me ultimately to a woman who I became friends with. She still calls herself a shaman and a healer. And I think I just was in a very vulnerable place. I take complete ownership of this, but when I think about, the space, my headspace at that point in time, I was really ready for something big and transformational to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I, for the first time, really sunk my teeth into the New Age, starting in 2010. My marriage was not going well. the transition to try and come back was not going well. And the more stressed I became, the more I started looking for help and answers through the New Age.
For clarification, when you talk about a Unitarian church, what exactly do they believe?
They do not profess Christ. I didn't attend the church for very long, so I want to be clear that I'm not an expert on Unitarian Universalism at all. I never became a member of the church, and I really can't say for sure, but I know that they don't profess Christ. I know that it's really about a plurality of beliefs. It's kind of there for people from any number of faith traditions to come together in a way that doesn't offend anyone, and to just sort of sing and have fellowship of a kind, I suppose.
Okay, so it's basically anything goes as long as you believe in something. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I think that, while Jesus is certainly mentioned, I think that he is given, the same rank as other, as sort of prophets and other leaders of other belief traditions. So, yeah.
Okay. So moving forward, you meet this woman, and so what happens once you start saying, all right, I'm going to take things a little more seriously. I'm going to delve into the New Age. I'm going to work with this shaman. What happened from there?
Well, interestingly, in retrospect, I can see this. What happened almost immediately is that my husband, he started to pull away a little bit. Then I kind of reached deeper, not noticing a connection between choices I was making and things that were starting to happen in my marriage. That isn't to say that things were always roses, but there was a real connection between when I started spending time with this woman and getting further into the New Age and a marriage that definitely was starting to dissolve. So my husband actually took a position clear across the country. I think he was hoping that he could lure me out there, and I wasn't going to have it. So he went away to work for probably 6 months somewhere else. And when it became clear that I was just fine, thank you very much, doing my own thing and working with this woman and trying to self-actualize that I didn't need him, I suppose, then, he came back. He came back.
Wow.
So, it definitely was taking a powerful hold of my thoughts and the choices that I was making. And I was definitely becoming, I think, more stubborn and more hard-hearted, though at the time, I don't think it felt that way.
Well, it's funny because, I mean, when you're that deep into something, you don't necessarily see the problem, even if other people see it.
Right.
To you, it's like, hey, I'm fine. I'm just doing my thing,
Right. I'm trying to better myself.
Right. Well, and I mean, I can kind of relate because I went through a period of time where I was trying to cover some pain of my own. And so I got very deep into MUDs, which are multi-user dungeons, and everybody saw the addiction, but I didn't. I got deeper and deeper and deeper because I needed it. So I totally get where you're going with that. So what did this actually look like when you were, was it just going into divination, or did you play with other things? And
yeah, it was primarily going into divination initially, and doing a lot of journaling, but I was kind of beginning to invite helpers, unseen helpers, while I was doing this. And I didn't really have a plan for it, and I didn't really understand it exactly, but this was kind of how I was being coached by the shaman friend. So I was, just doing a lot of divination, trying to figure myself out and figure out my life and gain some greater sense of control over it. I think some greater sense of self-mastery. And so those were the primary things. She was suggesting I set up some kind of altar, to whom I couldn't tell you. I mean, I still to this day don't really understand what that altar represented, but it was some kind of invitation, I think now.
Wow.
And so she said, put a bowl of water by the door and, put something else that means something to you near the bowl of water. And so, I was doing a few things like that in the home as well. Again, not really understanding it, but just really trusting her to lead me in this a little bit. Eventually, this led to energy healing work that she also did on me, on my person. So that was something that I started to experience. And those were, I think, once I let her do that, once I had agreed to that, that's really when, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I think the gates of hell really started to open. Like things started to get really hard and really weird and really scary once that started happening.
And so you're talking about Reiki and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she also claimed to be speaking to my ancestor guides and, things like that. I mean, she was holding conversations with, I don't know who, while she was doing this energy work on me.
At this point in time, did you have any kind of a, hey, you know what, maybe we don't want to go down this road. This isn't a good idea. Did you have any kind of a sense that might be the case?
Not yet. The overwhelming sense that I had at that point was just, I was becoming more and more anxious. But I don't think I could put my finger on that as being related to what I was allowing in my life, because I have a history of depression and anxiety, a lot of childhood wounds and things. And so I just thought my anxiety was getting worse and that I was in a season of high anxiety. And boy, was I. And that this was just the beginning. But I just noticed that my anxiety was increasing, and my kind of general misery and discontent. Like I had moments where I felt extremely high, but most of the time I just felt anxious and insecure and a little bit frightened.
What happened next once all the healing, quote, energy healing started?
To my surprise and to my husband's surprise, we became pregnant. And this was at 40, I became pregnant. That had its own, I mean, my marriage wasn't in a good place. And it was a time of high stress, I would say.
Right. I thought, yep.
And a lot of transitions and then physically needing to move and, a bunch of things were happening. And so I wasn't, in some ways that was a blessing because I wasn't doing as much of the new age stuff during my pregnancy. I was, I was working a lot and just kind of trying to prepare myself for parenthood after not having spent any of my life preparing myself for that. But I maintained my relationship with the shaman. And so she would jump in and out of my day-to-day life, but she was not nearly as much of a presence. So I don't know if there's a relationship or not, but I had an extremely, extremely difficult and lengthy labor. And she was present for a good part of that. I didn't know what I was walking into, of course, having never had a baby before, but I just remember being really terrified. And I've always wondered if it was because she was there and what she was working while I was there, if that makes any sense.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So anyway, it was just a really difficult labor. And then once my daughter was with us, she has some challenges, and she was a very, she was a colicky baby. She had a lot of, she didn't sleep, she didn't soothe. And so, the first few months of her life, a real blur of just, depression and almost no sleep and a lot of stress. And so I would say within about 6 months of my daughter's birth, I was really reaching for New Age again because I felt like I needed help. I will also point something out, though, because it was at exactly the same time that I started digging deeper into New Age that I would struggle to get my daughter to sleep, to nap, and I started singing to her, and a lot of different songs would come to me, but Sunday school songs started coming to me, and I started singing them to her. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't know where these are coming from. I mean, it isn't that I didn't know them, but I just thought that's weird. I don't know why I'm singing these to her, but this works. This works. I'm going to keep doing it. And so I did. But anyway, yeah, that's when I started reaching really, really heavily back into New Age. I started working a lot with stones and placing them in different places around the house to try and get them to do specific things for me or my family, to try and get my daughter to sleep, and just all kinds of things. Really trying to manipulate reality in whatever way I believed that I might be able to, because things were really difficult.
So here, on one hand, you're singing Sunday school songs. On the other hand, you're still delving into New Age. I can imagine that at this point, spiritually, you're kind of a train wreck.
Yes. And very confused. And starting to get a little bit scared. What
was the actual turning point from, did it get worse, or did you finally come to a turning point, or how did that?
It got way worse. Okay. I didn't come to Christ until my daughter was almost 3. So I still had some descending to do. I basically, to try and sum it up, I the more my anxiety increased, the more anxious and stressed I felt, the more I was asking the unseen for help, and kind of the more desperately I was reaching for everything I could think of. I started doing something that some people call muscle testing, but it's not the kind of muscle testing that happens in a clinical setting. It's called sway testing, I guess. And this is a practice where you put something in your hand or you hold a thought in your mind and really kind of use it as a divination. Like, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Depending on how my body sways, this is, I'm gonna trust that this is telling me what to do. And I started doing that for everything. Because I just felt completely out of control. I didn't know how to handle some of the issues that were coming up with my daughter, and I was in a pretty isolated situation. Yeah, I was just really struggling. So, my marriage was really disintegrating. Things were not going well, and we had some pretty decisive arguments that led to me feeling that I needed to take my daughter elsewhere. In 2015, I took her somewhere else, and to live with the grandmother who raised me, the Christian grandmother who raised me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And and really scary things started happening as soon as I got into that house. But
what do you mean by that? What happened?
Well, because I continued with my practices, even though I wasn't in very frequent contact with the woman who had sort of led me down this path. I was still relying on doing the same old. So, when I would finally get my daughter into bed at the end of the day, I would go into my bedroom, and just start talking to
the entities. Okay.
Now I know they were demons, but at the time I thought I was talking to angels, and I was of a kind.
Except they were of the fallen sort, right?
Of the fallen sort, yes. Didn't know that. Should have, if I'd been biblically aware, if I'd been paying attention in church all that time, I would have known that there are both kinds of angels. Anyway, to my shame, that was not something in my awareness, and so I thought I was talking to angels, and I thought they were helping me.
And when you say talking to them, did they actually? At this point in your life, were they actually communicating back to you?
Well, I was using sway testing in a way. Sometimes I did hear things. Sometimes I could hear, or I thought I could hear kind of whispers and things. But mostly I was asking yes or no questions, and then my body was, swaying.
Was your grandmother aware that you were involved in any of this?
No.
What happened then?
Over the course of a summer, I felt that I was being asked to do things. I felt that I was being led to do things that didn't make any sense to me, and things that started to seem pretty scary. This doesn't involve harming other people, but just big time-wasting things, energy-wasting things. The big thing that I was sort of led down was this path that I could help people cross over. And just this huge deception that made me feel important and like I had a purpose, because I was kind of at the low point in my life of just feeling like all I did from the moment my feet hit the floor till the moment I got in bed was, take care of my daughter, and I was exhausted and just felt like that there was no meaning and no point to my life anymore. I mean, I felt like my mind was being wasted, and I was definitely, I think at this point, I was starting to realize that I had undiagnosed postpartum depression on top of everything else. But, I was just not in a good mental state. I wanted to feel important. And boy, the enemy knows that. And so I kind of just had these elaborate deceptions about how I was going to, do my own energy healing on people. And I was going to be helping people to cross over, that somehow people could die and go into this in-between place and not where they were neither here nor there, and that only certain people could help them with that. And it was insane. It was insane. Wow. I mean, I fully recognize that at some point I stopped being in my right mind. And that's pretty frightening. And there were moments where I could see that was the case. By then, my daughter was starting to say things that were scary. I mean, my grandmother was becoming very frightened. She said that my actions, the way that I seemed, my affect was scaring her. And
did your grandmother finally pick up on the fact that you were involved in the occult?
Yes.
Okay. And how did she? I mean, being the church-going Christian sort, how did she respond to that?
She responded to it mostly with prayer and with trying to explain to me that she felt I was being deceived. She didn't get into anything too specific. I think she felt a little over her head. She's older and isn't really aware of some of these practices or even what they mean. So she wasn't able to recognize some of it. But she could tell from my affect that things were. I mean, she felt there was something demonic happening for sure, and she told me as much. She was praying, and I was so afraid, actually, at this point of the darkness that I could feel all around me, that I started praying with her, even though it was really hard-hearted to God. I started praying with her. I didn't pray to God. I still addressed angels, but I was praying. I was getting down on my knees with her, and I was praying, and I think the Lord was still using that a little bit to start to soften me up. And at that same time, even though, when everything was just completely falling apart, for some reason I started tuning to Christian radio, and that was the only radio that I wanted to listen to in my car.
Now that's interesting. That's very interesting.
So I was listening to it. I mean, I definitely have a testimonial for Caleb. Hey, you guys really changed my life. I really do think that the Lord used that to start moving me in a different direction.
I can't even imagine the spiritual conflict that's going on in your heart and in your mind at this time.
Absolutely. It was suffocating. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt like I was carrying this huge weight. And I do think in retrospect that there was, all out warfare happening during that time.
I'm certain.
Yeah. And I totally, I do wonder, when God's warfare really got underway. And I'm wondering if that's right around the time that I started singing Sunday school songs, like, if the Holy Spirit got involved at that point or when. But it did seem like increasingly, even though I was really confused and very conflicted, that my spiritual openness was leaving space for God.
So what happened when you started playing the Christian music in your home, or no, in your car?
In the car.
So, I mean, because I know that Caleb oftentimes will offer like little messages or something. Did any of that kind of penetrate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it must have. It still felt fairly distant for me. I didn't really wholeheartedly buy into what I was hearing. It's just like Jesus with his parables. He uses story to get behind our defenses. Mm-hmm. And that's what I felt like those songs were doing. I felt like the songs were getting behind the defenses that I kind of put around my heart. there was one song in particular. There were a few songs that really ministered to me. I don't know if you're interested in knowing what that.
Oh, of course I am. Of course I am. Of course I am.
So the one song that, and it just kept playing over and over and over again was, oh my gosh, I'm not even sure if this is what it's called, but You Lift Me Up by the Afters.
Mm-hmm.
That song just, I mean, it made me weepy every single time that I heard it. And it definitely got into, you know, the dry and painful places. And I found myself wanting to hear it. And every time it came on, I just was, this is what I need. This is what I need.
Right. Okay. So what happened going from there?
You know, still in this darkness and confusion, I had one very, very frightening day where I hadn't been sleeping really at all that summer. But I had a really difficult night. It was hot. It was in August, and it was just, you know, brutal. And I woke, my daughter has never been a good sleeper. It's always been an issue. And I just felt like I was starting to lose my mind over her not sleeping. And I was desperate to get her some help. And so it was a Sunday morning. I got in the car intending to drive to the mall to try and solve the sleep problem. Mm-hmm. And get a different mattress, and just, you know, I was going to spend whatever I needed to spend of my husband's money to make this happen. And
right.
As soon as I got in the car and started driving up the street, I heard a voice say, "Slow down." And it sounded like that. I mean, it was almost like a punch in the gut. Slow down. And I thought, okay, well, that's weird, but I basically ignored it. I turned onto another road, and the car, even though I was trying to accelerate, the car slowed down. And
okay.
I thought, okay, this is scary. And then I heard, "Look." I'm thinking, all right. So I look, I turn, because I'm passing a non-denominational, basically the equivalent of a Unitarian Universalist church, which was in the neighborhood. As I'm passing by, I see somebody in a car. And so I look, and then I kind of keep driving, and I'm getting more and more scared. And suddenly this scenario starts playing in my head of, okay, is that person in trouble? What's happening? Why am I supposed to look? Am I supposed to help? What, you know, and I'd gone from sort of feeling hopeful, I'm leaving the house, I'm going to go get something for my daughter, to feeling like I'm getting pulled into something
right.
by the unseen that I don't understand. And things just started unraveling from there, because I drove a few more blocks and got out of the car, pulled over, got out of the car, started freaking out. The long and the short of it is that there was this conversation that started happening in my head that was trying to get me to implicate somebody that I didn't really know for doing something that I hadn't seen. Basically, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there were voices telling me to throw somebody under the bus. I mean, that's the long and the short of it. It's much more complicated than that, but I felt like that's where it was leading. And I felt the wrongness of that, but also really scared and overwhelmed, because whatever had access to me it really had access to me. And I felt like it was, I did eventually get to the mall. By the time I got to the mall, I was feeling like I'd already been through the ringer. I felt very oppressed and overpowered almost. And I remember audibly hearing, "You need to go sit down." And so I left the store, and I went and I sat down. There was a place to sit down. And then I heard, "You need to lay down." And while this was happening, my heart was, you know, pounding out of my chest. And I really did feel like I was going to pass out. Like I just was completely overcome, for lack of a better word, physically overcome. And so I did this, and I thought, okay, I'm going to lay down here and die. That's how bad I felt.
Oh, wow.
And ended up going to the emergency room and spending, 3 hours in the emergency room, where they couldn't really find anything other than that I was a little bit dehydrated. But I felt while I was in that emergency room like there was literally a war being waged for me right then and there. I kept hearing or sensing trust, trust, trust. Like there was something willing me to just breathe and trust because I was just getting more and more. I don't know how to describe it. Anyway, yeah. So that day was kind of a turning point because I felt that, I felt afraid to die. Mm-hmm. I felt that I was probably going to. I didn't understand what was happening to me and nobody could explain it. That's kind of when I started talking to God.
From that, what brought you back to actually communication with God? Because, that's kind of a big leap in respect from your listening to these demonic entities to now you're actually wanting to talk to God.
Well, somewhere at some point in my life, some part of my heart knew and trusted and acknowledged God. I think I built a lot of walls, but I can only come to the conclusion that some part of me still recognized his sovereignty because I asked him for help.
And so what happened once you start talking to God?
Well, not much. I still wasn't understanding. I wasn't understanding what I was doing. I didn't really know what I was asking. I just knew I felt desperate and was just kind of grasping for help. But my grandmother, within a few days, my condition continued to deteriorate and I was just getting weaker and weaker. And she was praying over me and she invited somebody. She led me through the sinner's prayer. And then she invited a friend on the phone to pray with me as well. And so that's really when Jesus entered the picture. It was just kind of a process. I really did have to hit rock bottom to look up.
Was it a process to kind of get out of this spiritual quagmire that you had gotten yourself into, or did he remove you immediately, or?
Well, what happened is that my grandmother made a phone call to a longtime friend who lived in another city, and that friend made a phone call, and she got a pastor from a church in a nearby town to come out to our house that day. He prayed with us. He put a book of promises in my hand and encouraged me to start reading through some Psalms, and also put me in connection with a woman he called a true prayer warrior, and invited me to start praying with her on a daily basis. And so that's kind of what started things happening pretty rapidly. I didn't understand what was happening. It isn't like suddenly all the scales came off my eyes and I could see the truth of things. That came pretty gradually. I felt rescued. I felt lighter. I could actually see some light for the first time in a long time. And the daily prayer, this woman literally, she prayed with me every single morning between 6:30 and 7, because that was kind of before I had to make breakfast for my daughter and everything. So she would, whenever I was available, she would do it. And that committed prayer time every morning, even though I didn't know how to pray, she would pray with me, and that really got things going. She also did Bible study with me and, just was very instrumental in making herself available to me to guide me and lovingly show me ways in which I'd been deceived.
Wow.
But it's been just a peeling back of layers that continues. This was in August of 2015, so it hasn't even been 3 years. But I think I am in the accelerated program.
Yeah, I can see why. Yeah. Maybe there's someone who is stuck in that quagmire. Maybe they're listening and maybe they're stuck and they're in a similar place to you, and maybe they're playing with things that seem right at the time, but what would you say to them?
When you're full of yourself, there's no room for God. And in my experience with the New Age that humbled me greatly, I believe the New Age was all about becoming more and more full of self. I think other really scary things can start to happen, but I wish I felt more articulate on the topic, just that I feel that the New Age is about self-love, but it's not even a true self-love. It's more about self-love through power and self-mastery. And when you do that, you're not giving God any room to work.
And from your experience, what should Christians be aware of around the New Age that maybe they aren't aware of now?
I guess I would say that if you can't find it in your Bible, then seriously question whether or not it belongs in your life.
Amen. I had some experiences myself.
Mm-hmm.
There were some people in my life that were involved in New Age or tarot card reading at
Mm-hmm.
one point. My best friend was a spiritist, and this was before I became a believer,
Mm-hmm.
and even to a point after I became. And so what I would say at this point is if you are speaking to anything, an entity or anything, and it cannot declare that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father, then I would seriously question if that entity is from God. And
Amen.
if it is not from God, then it is of the evil one.
Yep. And I would agree wholeheartedly. Again, I think, unfortunately, many people are biblically ignorant, and I was also, even though I was raised as a Christian, we didn't read the Bible, so I didn't.
And that is a common problem within the Christian church. How many people do you think are so biblically illiterate? Oh, and then they say, oh, this isn't so bad. I think the biggest deception starts with, what did God really say?
Right.
Did God really say that you will not die? If you eat this fruit, back in the book of Genesis, if you eat this fruit, you'll know the knowledge of good and evil. And oftentimes when you're looking at New Age, what they want is hidden knowledge.
Yes.
I would strongly encourage anyone that is listening, Christian or non-Christian, check everything. What are you watching? What are you letting in your ear gate, your eye gate? What are you listening to?
Yep.
If it's not glorifying to God, then it doesn't need to be in your life.
Yep.
So, well, Sophie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really hope that somebody needed to hear it.
With that, guys, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Unresolved Life Podcast. Hey, if this has been useful and you know that someone that needs to hear it, would you please click that share button? And if this is your first time hearing, there is a little subscribe button that you can click. You will not miss a future episode. And with that, I'm Teresa Blaze. This has been the Unresolved Life Podcast. We will speak again next time.
You've been listening to the Unresolved Life Podcast. To catch all our past shows, go to unresolved.life. That's unresolved.life.